Hi, this is Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya speaking to you from the Empathy Clinic here in Oakville. I want to introduce Florian Decludt. He is an outstanding teacher and educator overseas who doesn't just teach students, but he teaches the teacher to optimize their experience, but also the experience of teaching. Plus, he comes from a global perspective. He's looking at the mind, the brain, the heart, and the physical experience of the individual to optimize their teaching experience and their learning experience as well. Today we spoke about active listening. Let's hear what he has to say. The key in active listening, as you say, is I just listen to what the students say and ask follow-up questions in line with the flow of the conversation and their interest. So I love that statement that you came up with. But I think that we need to define what active listening actually is. What does it look like? So for me, everyone understands what listening is. It's using your ears to receive information. What's the active part? I'd like to hear what you say about the active part.
Sometimes you talk to someone and you feel like you're the only two people in the room. Like it's like everything else is blocked off. And that's an indication of active listening happening. So I think the best way to show active listening, to notice it, is to see how do people react to each other. Do they focus on the other person, or do they subconsciously focus on what they're going to say next? In terms of what do they say, like do they just say what they have in mind, or do they bounce off whatever the other person is saying? The first thing I do is I rephrase what you just said in my own words. To me, that's an indication of active listening, because not only I bounce off what you said, but I also make a deliberate effort to try to understand what you were saying and check my understanding of the message with you before we move forward in the conversation.
So in other words, if I was an air traffic controller and you were flying an airplane, and this is perfect because you got the headset on, so maybe you're the air traffic control, our communications have to be so precise. There could be no room for misunderstanding. If I say decrease the altitude 1,000 meters, if you don't hear that properly, or even if I don't say that properly and you don't hear that properly, that could be a bad day for a lot of people.
Very bad day for everyone.
Sometimes the message has to be repeated back, and even repeated a few times to prove that the message has been received. Now, the only thing I want to add to your lovely answer, by the way, that was a great way to put it. I like the way you said that there's other ways to tell that people are listening. But when I listen to someone, I'm always aware of how much noise is in my head. Especially someone like you, when you're saying so many important things, I'm thinking, I could say this, or I could say that, or I could say this. And the next thing I'm realizing, I'm not listening to you anymore. I'm listening to the voice in my head. And for me, active listening means that you have to get your voice out of your head and listen to that person's voice coming into your mind. And hopefully when you're talking to them, they do the same thing.
We're so focused in our own voice. The inner voice is trying to do the right thing because you're trying to look smart and contribute to the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to just say anything. You kind of want to think it through beforehand, but then it's counterproductive because you forget about what the other person is saying. And I think, subconsciously, I think people notice it. You kind of see that glaze in the eyes, like when people are thinking about what they want to say, you just if this guy's not listening anymore, you're just thinking about what he's going to say next. So I think it's really important to quiet down that voice. And actually, I think that's something that most people struggle with because it's just something I would even go as far as saying we're hardwired to do. But it's something that's standing in the way of gaining so much more insight and building so much deeper connections because it's preventing us from deeply listening to the other people.
Now, Florian, I do want to point out something that you said earlier. So I was actually listening to you, but I was listening at the same time. So I need to practice active listening too. But human beings have been on the planet or some form of hominid for almost 4 million years. Human beings, our version has been on the planet for about 300,000 years, and language has been around for about 50,000 years. So what that means is that we've had this huge amount of time where we've actually been using nonverbal cues to communicate to each other. So as you so correctly pointed out, when two people are talking, there's all this nonverbal stuff that's going on that communicates volumes of information, which is why when people are talking to each other or remembering a conversation, they may not remember the words, but they remember the way it was communicated. And I think that's sometimes a big stumbling block for people when they're actively listening, because their ears are working, but their other senses are noticing all of that meta communication, which is everything you communicate as well as those words, that might confuse the person.
Definitely. Actually, I remember reading a book. It's called What Everybody is Saying. Joe Navarro, former FBI agent, and he goes through all the body language and like how can you read like the visual cues and like how much of it is subconscious. Like you have, so for example, he talks about how your feet are, whether they're open, whether they're pointing towards the door. Subtle thing that, if you're not aware of it, like you give away so much communication through something as unlikely as your feet or even your hands. Even though we're not aware of it, we're not aware of what our feet are doing. We're not aware of what the other person's feet are doing, but I think we get a sense of it subconsciously because I think our, as you said, we spent most of human history communicating non-verbally. Yes. So as a result, our brains have been trained to read the cues without necessarily being aware of it. Sometimes you just have that feeling about that person, like that person is just not interested, but you can't really put your finger on, probably because their feet were oriented in a direction which didn't indicate engagement, and your brain picked up on that.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time when we were speaking in different time zones, but I promise you, I'll get Florian back later on. He's a wonderful resource of information. But what are the action points here? Let's go through them. When you're listening to someone, engage them. Also, stop listening to the conversation you're having with yourself in your head. Pay attention to what they're saying and prove that you're paying attention to what they're saying by maybe even repeating what they're saying. And above all, look out for all the other things that you're communicating so that you're not pushing the person away, you're continuing to engage them. Hope that helps. We'll see you next time.